Are we just fooling the rest of the world about these targets and the ability to keep 1.5 degrees alive?
No, I think you should increase renewable energy. Now, tripling it, fine, provided that you ensure that also you provide storage capacity. It's not intermittent. The problem, the grid will suffer a lot of problems if we keep adding without ensuring that the storage facilities, this energy supply continue 24 hours a day rather than only part of the day. The problem is, as you know, when we look at storage facility and battery storage and all of it, the cost goes up. So that it comes back to affordability. You need to make sure that, I showed a graph a couple of months back and showing Germany, the UK and France, where there is good growth in alternatives and renewables and all of that. The cost of utility is going up. And the graph is shown from 2005 to 2023. So you can introduce more and more of these things, but you need to make sure that it is affordable, because if it works for a certain part of the world where they can afford, and I'm not sure they can afford anymore, but let's assume that they can afford this increase in cost, it's not going to be affordable for the other part of the world. So that's why people are complaining, is why are we seeing more utilization of coal? Because it's secure and it's available.
This is very interesting because you're suggesting people can afford it in Europe. Very recently, there's been a lot of protests in Brussels and in the Netherlands. The farmers are hitting to the streets because the cost of operation is much, much higher. Does that slow down the energy transitions we're trying to achieve, Angela? Because there's a lot of political pressure in Europe in particular, and the United States as well.
Well, you can't, you can't scale technology without the pull of social transformation. And within the OECD, as well as across the world, structural inequalities have increased. So within huge pockets of OECD countries are people who are struggling to pay their bills, struggling to maintain convenient and reliable access to energy. And you've got to pay for the whole system transition. So it's not just about substituting, swapping the supply side technologies. You've got to build in the storage capacity, the transport capacity, the processing capacity, but most of all, the useful, the wider and wiser uses of energy. Who decides who has access to the most available and least cost energy in the world? We leave it to the market, and I'm not going to try and, I usually do this thing where everybody thinks I'm having a go at men. I'm not having a go at men, but electric vehicles revolution is everybody's saying, wow, this is going to do it. This is the global moonshot mentality. Well, let's remember, an electric vehicle has 85 kilograms of copper wire. An ICE has 15 kilograms of copper wire. We've mined out all the easy copper in the world. We're now moving mountains to get the same amount. We've got to have the energy for that. Where does it come from? And if it's people driving cars, what happens to people in multi-occupancy dwellings who are trying to heat and feed and clothe and bathe, right? So my piece is this: I don't want to have an energy transition that replicates the last energy transition, because it ended up as in a place where women aren't part of the system, half the needs of the world aren't part of the system. I want an energy transition that really meets humanity's needs for energy and then works out what's the system to deliver that.
Very good. How about addressing demand? I know there's a paper that you've read, and I'm sure Angela's seen it, from the World Economic Forum. They worked with the International Business Council in January to say, what efficiencies can we generate? It's 120 largest companies in the world, from manufacturers to the banking institutions, where we can carve out some efficiencies that move the needle where the demand in the West is not as intense, and you do allow allocation for the global South, those who have not had access to energy, to grow. What is your view about dealing with the demand side of the equation, Mr. Nasser?
I think it's important to deal with the demand side, because if you want to reduce emission, you need to work on demand. And demand is, I cannot, always people talk about scope 3, and I always say, when you talk about scope 3, if you want to buy an 8-cylinder car, that's a personal choice compared to a 4-cylinder car in terms But you are going to emit much more with an 8-cylinder. So buying something that is smaller, that reduce the demand of energy, or buying an electric vehicles or whatever, is definitely going to help the demand. As I said, when I mentioned the 90 million barrel over the last 15 years, it's not only in plants, it's in buildings, in appliances, it's an efficiency everywhere, and that's really impacting the demand. And this is an important factor. But back to your earlier point, John, you know, if you do a survey today and you tell people, do you want clean energy? Yes, everybody will tell you, yes, we need clean energy. Are you willing to pay for that clean energy? And then the answer will differ. So everybody wants clean energy. The issue is, at the end of the day, even for the European, that's why we see U-turns recently in terms of ambitions, is how much it would cost. And we did, I mentioned this earlier, you know, before, we are trying to help in the transition by bringing hydrogen to the market. And as you know, when we put our prices and we tried to look for offtake, $200 for blue hydrogen, $400 for green hydrogen. But you need an offtake for 15 to 20 years. And they're finding it difficult to sign these agreements.
So just for everybody that's in the audience, $200 a barrel equivalent.
Exactly.
Right?
But
blue hydrogen, which is natural
sign
gas.
An offtake agreement for $200 or $400 per barrel of oil equivalent is very expensive. Today, for some, they consider it as expensive at $90, or when it hits $100 or more. So imagine signing a $200. But you know, this is the technology that is available today. You need to build this facility. This is how much it will cost you to get a decent returns on your investment. And you are not going to build it unless, so everybody wants clean energy. The problem is, until we are able to reduce the cost using innovation and technology at a certain point, it will cost what it costs today.
Well, it's a very interesting point you bring up, because as you both know, we started at a very expensive price for solar panels, and there's the same thing with wind turbines. Governments did provide incentives. There's much more competition, and the price came down. Can we see the same for hydrogen in the future, where industry says, this is a technology that works, here are the incentives to go in, to your point, and then that price comes down. It's a natural progression, and that's where we see the wider impact, Angela? Well, I wanted to delve on getting an honest assessment of how worried society should be. So when they see rapid climate events taking place, they're starting to connect the dots that mission control, we have a problem. And I'd love to hear from the CEO of the largest energy company in the world by market cap and production. Can we deliver energy and still meet our climate goals? And I'd love to have you, is there hope here? I've been very impressed by industry. When there's a challenge, they usually wrap their heads around it as a collective good to find solutions. Can you sit hand on heart today and say you can do both, John? We can hit the climate goals and bring these people in the global south to a more realistic standard of living, or not?
I think we made our commitment to reach net zero by 2050 as Saudi Aramco, scope 1 and scope 2. But I just want to point to certain things. You know, when we talk about solar and wind, and you mentioned the lower cost, this is generation cost. The minute you could hook it up to the grid, the cost is different. This is where people do not understand. The minute you put a backup, you see, if you rent a car or you buy a car and use it 1 hour, you are paying for the 24 hours, even though the 23 hours you are not using it. So if you want a backup, that you want me to have the gas to your location as a backup, and you are using it in 1 hour a day, you are going to pay for the 24 hours. This is where they don't understand the energy system and how it works. Because I have to build the infrastructure, I have to build the pipelines, I have to put the compressors. Now, whether you use it or you don't use it, you have to pay for it. So this is the difference and lack of understanding when people talk about solar and wind. It costs differently when you hook it up to the grid.
To the grid.
This is, that's why the minute you start also saying, I need to put the backup and the storage facility, battery storage that is required, the cost will go up. So now back to your questions about would we achieve our ambitions considering all of, yes, if we are, as I said, focused on emissions and we don't become winners and losers, and at the end of the day, what we need to provide is energy to the world, affordable, secure, and sustainable. And we can achieve a lot, you know, if you think about carbon capture and storage or direct air capture that we are working on. Yes, it's direct air capture at the early stage in terms of reducing the cost, but it is going to work over the long term. And we need to continue to build all of these facilities and decarbonize. Even under net zero, by the way, in 2050, you still are going to use hydrocarbon. So you need to go and focus on reducing the emission of the existing hydrocarbon. How do you make it clean? How do you build more carbon capture and storage facilities? How do you reduce the cost of these carbon capture and storage to make it also affordable for the consumers? Because at the end of the day, if the governments are not giving incentive for carbon capture and storage, the consumer will pay the additional cost for carbon capture and storage. So you can achieve all of that, but you need also, you need to invest to ensure that there is enough resources. We need all resources. You need oil, you need gas, and you need alternatives. If you don't have enough resources, prices will shoot. And you will end up using more coal. Because coal is available and it is affordable. So you need to invest today to ensure that you have adequate resources available. You need to decarbonize at the same time. And this is what we are doing. If you look at our methane, our CO2 emission, it's one of the lowest. If you look at the country, our majority shareholder, 50% will be renewable. So we're not against solar and wind. 50% of the utility will be renewable. We have the biggest hydrogen plants. We are working on blue hydrogen, green hydrogen. We are working on blue hydrogen. We are working on geothermal, e-fuel, incentives for carbon capture and storage, all of the above. But we are not abandoning our conventional resources and making sure we continue to decarbonize existing resources. So you need to work on all of that, and you can achieve what you are aiming for.
Good. We're living, Angela brought it up, through it's a poly-crisis world today. Russia, Ukraine's grinding on. There's a war in Sudan, Israel, Hamas. Arteries of trade are getting clogged up and threatened. Panama Canal is drying out. The Suez Canal has a similar challenge with conflict in the region. How do you make sure that the 5 Ds that you talk about on the energy transitions don't get knocked out because of a very disruptive world today? And I'll pose this to Amin as well.
So the 5 Ds, just to demystify them, another D. Decarbonisation, digitalisation, I think, and I'm looking for nods. If you don't understand, I'll start. Decarbonisation, digitalisation, decentralisation. We're moving to resources that are all much more geographically distributed. Demand disruption. We've had the world's first demand-led energy shock. COVID was a demand destruction energy shock. So we're sensitive not just to supply shocks, but demand shocks. And diversification. We are using energy in new and different ways. We have many different types of resources. We have many different ways of connecting those, pipeline, ships, whatever, many different ways of converting them. So the 5 Ds is energy transition is being shaped by all of those and impacts them. Energy transition isn't happening in a vacuum. It's happening alongside an industrial transformation, alongside an agricultural revolution, alongside a knowledge revolution, the rise of digitalization and artificial intelligence. So it's a messy process, and we have to get real that we've never done this before. Let's have a little bit of humility. Let's stop using perfection as the enemy of the good. Right? This really is going to take a lot of learning and pooled learning from different parts of the world. That's why the World Energy Council exists. And the energy trilemma itself is continuing to evolve. It evolves through the process of transition. It doesn't go away because we have more renewables. It changes. And it's evolving at the moment with resilience and justice. And the resilience part is something to bear in mind. We need to be a little bit softer in our thinking. I'm not saying we shouldn't be unambitious, but it's not a question of hitting 1.5 as though it's the centre of a target. It's a point of moving in that direction as fast as we possibly can, but not giving up hope as we get towards it. It looks like the signals say we're not going to hit it dead on. All signals at the moment point to an overshoot. The question now for us is not, if we do overshoot, how long is that going to be and how deep is that going to be? And the second question is, we're no longer just focusing on mitigation. We have to talk about climate adaptation. Developing economies need to build energy systems under different conditions. And we're going to have to think about carbon removals directly from the atmosphere if we really want to stay below 1.5 degrees.
Good. As Amin, you were saying, everybody wants to have clean energy if they had that choice, if it was affordable. But with the polycrisis that we had, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, bringing, again, high danger, high risk to a region that we know very well and you live in. The same thing with Sudan. The Red Sea arteries were getting attacked, tankers were getting derailed. We have problems with the Suez and Panama Canal because of climate adaptation that Angela's talking about. How, as a CEO, do you prepare for polycrisis? I remember interviewing you when you had the attack on Abqaiq by some drones. And the resilience you built into Aramco has been phenomenal. You came back up within 24 hours. But is this the new normal in which you have to run? And what takes priority in the world? Is it energy security or trying to deliver on the climate promises? Because when prices get high, people panic, and then climate seems to slide off the agenda.
I think it is, the world is not short of crises, We have so many all over. I think what's important if we are going to reach our climate ambition is we need to globalize rather than deglobalize. What we are seeing now is deglobalization. And we need to understand that there is no barriers when it comes to emission. So if in Europe they reduce their emission by introducing cleaner energy that costs this much, and in other parts of the world there is no collaboration when it comes to reaching the same goal, you'll end up with more emissions. So you cannot close your border and say this emission is, Europe is going to be clean. At the end of the day, there needs to be collaboration and globalization. If we are, China really helped a lot in reducing the cost of solar energy. A lot of what happened in solar panels is because of what China did in terms of reducing. We can see the same now in electric vehicles. Their cost is 1/3 to 1/2 the cost of other electric vehicles. So there needs to be globalization and collaboration if we are going to achieve our net zero by 2050. The other important element is digitalization. On one hand, we need more energy as we are building more data centers. And we're looking at the number that is incredible in terms of how much we need as an energy to facilitate AI and the new digital at the same speed that we are looking at by 2030 even. So, however, digitalization will help us also to reduce our emission. I'll just give one example. When we drill wells, we used to use tubing and drill bits. I don't want to get too technical. Now we're using what they call it underbalance for gas, using cold tubing, and through AI we can generate logs. That's very difficult to generate with cold tubing when you're drilling for a couple of kilometers in the subsurface. You are reducing the number of slots. Basically, you're reducing your costs significantly because you're increasing productivity using AI and using satellite and data and analytics. And at the same time, you're reducing your emissions significantly. So you can achieve both. So AI will introduce a lot of cost benefits. At the same time, it will help us to reduce our emission and achieve our goal of net zero by 2050.
Good. We have a couple of minutes left. I would love to find out what is the one thing that needs to be covered here at the World Energy Council to progress on the transitions that you talk about. And I'd love to get your thoughts on, if we go to 2050 or even 2040 on your scenarios. The IEA has projections of demand dropping. OPEC has a very different. How do we take out the BS, the arguments and the politics over what demand looks like? And how do you plan for the future? Go ahead, Angela.
So, first of all, we do our own comparisons of the peer group of global outlooks, visions and scenarios. So first of all, there's a very big difference. The technology road mapping approach to the future uses projections of demand. So basically, how will demand grow based on the existing uses? Well, that's not the future. The future of demand is coming from a different part of the world for very different uses than we use now. So we've got to think about how do we look around the corner, what are the assumptions? Then there's the visionary, the future we would like to see. The 1.5 future, as Amir has said, everybody wants clean energy. The question is, who will have access, at what price and at what reliability point, right? There's not a question around that. And then there's the scenario work, and we've just come to this Congress with a new set of scenarios, not because we are trying to compete with all the other scenarios, but because the question you've asked, the question that faces us all, is how do we collaborate better? When we have increasingly diverse needs and interests, we need to move faster and move forward together. And yet we seem to be at a moment where we have increasing polarization and othering going on. So we're bringing two scenarios out, and they're called rivers and rocks. And neither of them will guarantee getting us somewhere, but what they do is start to articulate what are the choices for aligning and collaboration. Are we just defaulting to the old recipes that brought us to here? Because we're very clear, what brought us to here won't get us to where we need to go. We need not just to talk about collaboration, but to make explicit choices about who is at the table collaborating and how are they aligning and moving forward together. And if you're at the CEO's roundtable, the advertising bit, tomorrow we're going to challenge you to think about what is an energy enabling ecosystem. What is an energy ecosystem? Not a business ecosystem. This energy ecosystem now is going to have networks and territories, cities and vulnerable communities at the table. That's the change-making model.
It's 7:30 to 10, so we're spending quite a bit of time in that debate. Your final word today on this, because there's a lot of debate which doesn't seem to advance as International Energy Agency, OPEC, other scenarios. The end of, we don't need any new investment into hydrocarbons. We've heard that one before as well, right? How do we move beyond the political positioning to say, this is how you plan for the future for oil and gas?
I think we just need to understand this is, when we talk about this is not academic discussion. And a lot of what you hear is academic discussions about the energy transition, what needs to happen. You need to phase down, and as if the problem is going to disappear tomorrow if we phase down or phase out from the sector. We need a thoughtful, effective strategy and an orderly transition for it to work. We don't want an emotional debate. The problem is every time you discuss the subject, it becomes a very emotional debate. And the focus of everybody should be about emissions and how can we reduce the emission to achieve our goal. The minute, you talk about, you need to shut down or you cannot invest, for the industry now, it's a total chaos, I have to say. It's a total chaos. The whole debate and the whole discussion, there is facts direct you to one road, and most of the companies are run by engineers and they understand what needs to be done, and the facts on the ground direct you to one road, but policies direct you to another road, completely different. We cannot transition by policy alone. Policy will not help you to transition. It will set the rules, but at the end of the day, if, as I say, technological readiness is not there, or competitiveness, economic competitiveness is not available, it's with this policy, it's not going to happen. It's not sustainable. And it might work for your country, but it's not going to work for the world. And transition is all about the world. So one size fits all doesn't work. We need to understand, for the transition to happen, we need to consider the 85% in the global south, their aspiration, their needs. At the same time, this is a narrow group thing sometimes when you come to the debate and the discussion. And that's not helpful for us to reach our aspiration of a net zero by 2050.
Good. And Angela was murmuring, not here. It's not a narrow thing.
Here.
We didn't have that in the opening session, that's for sure. It's always a pleasure to have you in the session. I'll see you at the World Economic Forum, hosted for the first time in Riyadh. Your convening power is extraordinary, and I love the different voices we have around the table at the 26th Congress. Happy anniversary again for entry. That's a centenary. I think they'll want to take a photo or two, but can we give a nice round of applause? I mean,